Welcome everybody. Happy Wednesday. If you are watching this later, please go ahead and hit hashtag replay so that we know that you are here and we can follow up to make sure that we're answering any questions that you have. Today we are talking all about giving feedback in an authentic and comfortable way. And there are so many reasons why giving feedback is sort of loaded for a lot of us. And that's something that we're going to dive into first, because really better understanding why giving feedback has become sort of a dirty word for us or even for society. You know, it's sort of just this thing that automatically can generate some icky feelings. Understanding that and understanding why that is for us is really one of the first steps, because then we have almost a tailored game plan for what we need to do differently, how we need to reframe things, how we need to start to twist and manipulate our mindset so it's actually more productive. So let me give you an example. Sometimes things that we feel come from what therapists and researchers call your first family. So basically growing up, right? It might not be necessarily directly from your parents. It could be from siblings. It could be from the environment in general, you know, the home environment that you were in. It could be from your grandparents. It doesn't need to be from any specific person. They just talk about them as being first family wounds. So say, for example, you grew up in a household where there was an expectation of how things were done. And if they weren't done that way, exactly that way, then they weren't good enough, right? Well, then you were almost constantly getting some sort of feedback that you yourself weren't good enough. And that just sets the stage from the time when we're like a very little kid, that feedback is yucky and crappy. And that may resonate with you, that may not. Like there might be some variation of that you're like, yeah, I get where maybe from the very beginning, you know, I did things wrong. I got feedback. Understand that and think about what, if anything, because for a lot of us, we're carrying some of this stuff with us throughout our adulthood. Think about where giving feedback as a child may have been seated in your mind, in sort of your brain mapping as a negative thing. And spend some time exploring that, because that can be something that just makes the prospect of giving feedback or getting feedback already not feel good. So that's the first recommendation that I have is understanding how far back the pattern of giving feedback and having that be negative goes, and try and understand that a bit. I'm getting a message that my internet connection is unstable. So I just want to check in and make sure everybody can hear me all right, and that goes, and try and understand.
Yes, you just cut out just for a sec, but.
Okay. All right. Okay. And I hear I'm streaming over there for you. So thank you. And I know we've got a few people live. So again, let us know if you've got any questions. I'll periodically pause, and Janessa can help make sure that any questions that I had that are coming up get answered. So that's the first thing, understanding it. And that could require some deep diving, and it might take a few visits there, and you might want some support on that. So think about it, think about what you need there. And then think about it in the context of your educational system, right? What type of ingrained patterns do you have, or can you just acknowledge having around getting feedback that you got from teachers, from nuns, from whomever was influential in your education, from primary school up through, you know, your graduate studies? Hopefully by the time we were reaching adulthood, we were being treated as, you know, respectable adults as we were given this feedback, but that doesn't always happen. Educational systems aren't immune to the same challenges that we have in corporate environments. So there, again, could be pattern behavior there. You may have been shamed for not knowing something, and that automatically is generating some initial cringeworthiness whenever somebody informs you of something you don't know in the corporate environment. Think on that, spend a little time there. Now, these are potentially places where you could spend a lot of time. Before you dive into it, think about how much time you're going to allow yourself to spend there, and be be cognizant of the time that you spend there. There is value in diving there. There is not necessarily value in staying there a long time. If you feel you need to keep going back to that, that's something that you probably need to revisit with professional support. So do keep just all of that in mind. But there's patterns to be learned there and understood. So then once you do your first family, your educational system, think about what experience you've had with feedback in terms of your career. Have you worked with managers or with team members that have done great jobs giving feedback, and then those that have done piss poor jobs, right? Terrible jobs, jobs that made anytime they opened their mouth, you cringe, right? Think about that and understand what you've learned there, because these are all patterns of our own internal response to even just the term giving feedback. And these are just really valuable to understand so that we have our own personal roadmap. So if, for example, if you were shamed in any way, shape, or form, we might actually have a tendency to sort of shame in how we give feedback. So you'll want to be aware of that. You'll also feel some reaction, some shame reactions when people want to give you feedback. Just begin to acknowledge those. Try and understand where they're coming from. You won't necessarily change them right off the bat, but even just acknowledging them gives you that first step towards getting where you want to go in terms of feedback being something that you can authentically and comfortably give and authentically and comfortably get. I'm going to pause, just take a sip of water, see if there's any questions coming in, Janessa, from the live chat.
Not yet.
Okay. All right. All right. So that's just a little bit of introspection that helps us to become better leaders, to become the managers that we want to be, the leaders that we want to be, both in our business and personal lives. And then when it's time to give feedback, it should feel comfortable because you're doing it all the time, right? I wrote about this earlier this week. It feels awkward when once every few weeks you have to give some feedback. It feels awkward because we're not doing it enough. Regularly, we should be looking for feedback. We should be looking for things that we want to be telling people. We should be looking for compliments in essence, because the majority of what we want to give feedback on is positive. Positive feedback is almost like a bank that you give so that you build up your trust and rapport. And it's not done with any sort of manipulation, or it should all be authentic. It should be true. Like, you shouldn't say, you did a really great job on that if the person didn't do a really great job on that. Don't say that. That's not true feedback. If you really like the color scheme that they chose in their presentation, tell them that. Don't tell them that they did a great job on the presentation if you don't think it was a great job, but tell them that you loved the color scheme. Find the things that you really like and start giving feedback on that, and make sure that it's authentic. Make sure that it's really something that you said. And this practice of giving feedback regularly is just that. It's a practice. The more that you wake up every day and go into the office or go into, the place of business where you want to give feedback and think, I want to give feedback today, you are tuning your brain to look for things that you want to give feedback on. And you're going to start giving feedback every day, whether it's just at the end of a quick call where you say, hey, that was an awesome meeting. Thanks for running this. If it's just in passing in an email, like, I'm responding to your email and all of your very clear questions. Thank you for taking the time to think through this problem and put your questions in such an organized format. Look for things constantly that you want to give feedback on and start doing that. Do that day in and day out, and know that it's a practice. You might get through a week and be like, I only gave a few pieces of feedback this week. Keep going next week. Keep practicing. Keep thinking to yourself, I am a person that gives feedback in an authentic and comfortable way. I do that by practicing it regularly. I'm constantly looking for the things to give feedback on, and the majority of the feedback that I give is positive. The more that you are used to complimenting and giving feedback to people, the easier it's going to be when it's time to say, hey, you know what? I've got some feedback for you on that presentation you gave. Is now a good time for me to give that feedback? You've been giving this person feedback regularly, and now you're going to give them some constructive feedback. You are very importantly asking them if now is the right time for them to receive it, right? And they have an opportunity to duck out and say, you know what, actually, I'm really stressed. I'm headed to another meeting. Can we talk about this tomorrow? Sure. Now you know you're going to talk about it tomorrow. You have, again, opened the channel of communication. You've invited them to receive your feedback. They've turned you down for now, but you're going to do it again, or you're going to try again tomorrow. So again, when it's time to give some constructive feedback, you want to offer the person a chance to tap out, right? And that's a really kind thing to do as a manager, as a leader, as just a team member that wants to give some feedback to someone. Now, importantly for you, and as we as individuals receive feedback, if somebody's like, I've got some feedback for you on the presentation, and you know yourself, you're not in the right place, tap out, offer yourself that out. Be like, you know what, now is not the right time. Unfortunately, that person didn't offer you the opportunity to tap out and reschedule this conversation, but you can offer yourself the opportunity. You can say, you know what, I'm so grateful you've got feedback for me, but now is not the right time for me because of X, Y, Z. Can we talk about this tomorrow or on Friday, or however, you know, you want to position yourself. So again, I'm going to pause and just see if there are any questions on that.
Just a comment, Tara. So if somebody was to say that to me, is now a good time to give feedback, I would automatically think, wow, this is going to be negative.
Okay.
So how do we stop that as the receiver, taking it kind of negatively?
Yeah.
And I also got told today, I got feedback today. I helped someone very early this morning in the hospital. And it was, you're a great person. And it was just so nice to have that. But how, I'll go back to the question, how do we know, stop that negative feeling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
you always assume it's going to be negative.
Right. And very often when somebody says, is now a good time for feedback, or is now a good time for me to talk about that, it is because it's going to be constructive. And so there is a certain reframing or reconditioning that we can do of ourselves, like, ooh, that's going to be negative, but I'm going to learn a lot. Or, ooh, that's going to be negative. And you know what? I don't even really respect this person's opinion. So maybe this is going to be a practice for me in keeping a straight face. You know, you know what you could possibly learn from the situation. And the more that you can train yourself to build onto that, like, ooh, it's going to be negative. Reconditioning it to be like, ooh, it's going to be constructive is something that you can work on. But you can also build on it to like, ooh, it's going to be negative, or ooh, it's going to be constructive. And I know I'm going to learn from this person, or, and I really respect this person. And I'm sure that they're going to have a perspective that will open my eyes to new ways of thinking. Or like I said, there will be times where we get unsolicited feedback from people that we actually don't respect. And if we're in an environment where that's happening a lot, we're probably in the wrong work environment, and that's a whole different training, right? But there is still something in it that you will be able to use as an opportunity for growth. So the more that you can position yourself at that, this is an opportunity for growth in whatever configuration works in this situation, the easier it's going to be. And it's very possible that every time you hear that, you're going to elect to tap out initially. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, you know, in the event that somebody says, is now a good time for me to give you some feedback on the presentation, even if you don't have Jack coming up in the next 10 minutes, but you just want time to mentally prepare yourself, you can say, you know what, now's not really a good time. Can we talk about it tomorrow? And then you're at least giving yourself a day to psych yourself up and think about the reasons why or how you're going to learn from that conversation. And you might do that for the next 2 to 3 years whenever you receive feedback, until it's so ingrained in yourself that you know how to flip yourself to the, what am I going to learn from this? I can't wait to learn. And then you're going to say, yeah, now's a great time for you to give me feedback, but only when you're ready will you do that. And everybody's path is different.
Okay, thank you.
Gaynor? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Janice, any questions coming in over the Facebook Live? Can everybody there give us like waves, let us know that this is resonating, or if it's not, if you think we're totally on these weird tracks about feedback? Obviously, you know, when we sit down for performance reviews or for quarterly check-ins or whatever your organization may have in place, then you know you're going to be getting feedback, right? But you don't want that to be the very first time you're getting feedback from your manager in the past year. That's BS, right? You also don't want to be the first time you're giving people feedback if you have direct line reports. You want to be giving feedback regularly. Long ago, when I first became a manager of people, I was told the cardinal rule, according to my manager at that point, was like, you never want somebody to walk into an annual performance review and have anything be a surprise. Everything should be known, because you're constantly giving feedback and you're constantly, you know, helping that person understand exactly where they are. Like, they should even know what your rating of them is going to be on some said scale, right? Whatever your organization does. Now, there are even organizations that are moving away from performance evaluations, because there's data out there that if you allow a manager who's not eager to learn and to grow, if you allow that manager to only give feedback once a year, they're only going to give feedback once a year. And there are organizations out there that want to promote a culture of continuous feedback, continuous improvement. You know, that feedback loop that we so often see in quality and in learning, where feedback is given, an improvement is made, additional feedback is given, tweaks are made. There's various modifications of that cycle that's out there, both in quality management, in education. The more frequently we're going around that circle, the more comfortable that circle is. You go around it periodically, like every half a year, it's really awkward to be on that circle. But if you're going around it weekly, it's really comfortable. So again, going back to the frequency, going back to giving timely feedback. Now, timely feedback doesn't always mean it's in the moment. If you are working with somebody and they get incredibly heated in a meeting and you're like, oh, that's some feedback I want to give, they shouldn't get heated. That is not the time, right? That person's already heated in a meeting. You want to get out of that meeting. You want to approach that person one-on-one. Think about when you're giving that feedback and make sure it's as considerate of that person's feelings as possible. Because even if you've never been in that situation, even if you've never been in a meeting where you've been heated, you've undoubtedly been in some sort of argument where you've been heated. And imagine if somebody had tried to give you feedback then, how would you have felt, right? We can always tune in empathetically to the person that we want to give feedback to at like an emotional level. It might not be the exact situation, but from an emotional standpoint, we have been in a similar emotional state as that person may be in. And through that, we can draw upon that to have empathy and to craft and create, or at least move towards the right moment to actually give that feedback. Pausing again, just to see if there are any questions. A lot of times when I talk about giving feedback, I am presented with some of the extreme case scenarios that some of us will encounter, if not all of us, in our journey as line managers, as leaders, as even peers that give feedback. This might be more specific to line managers and leaders, where you actually need to work with somebody on a performance plan. And I'm not going to talk about that today, because that actual path is the extreme end. If you are at a point where you're already talking about working with somebody on a performance plan, you want to make sure that you are confident from your own perspective that you have regularly been giving feedback. On the whole, that feedback has been positive, or you've been looking as much as possible for the positive. And only then, if that person is not meeting their or fulfilling their job duties and responsibilities, are you going to be engaging with your HR and your leadership team, because that is what is required at that time. Now, if you're at an organization that doesn't have HR, that is a whole nother discussion. How do you go through a performance plan discussion without HR? That's really hard. And I would recommend that any company or organization that's thinking of doing that, first pause and think about engaging at least a contractual HR firm to help oversee that plan. Because once you move along the personal development plan path, there's really only two ways that goes, or three rather. So there's three ways that goes. One is you have a really formalized plan and that person adheres to it and miraculously comes around. That's a really rare, untreaded path that rarely happens. By the time you get to the personal development plan or the personal improvement plan, and I want to be clear that this isn't just your annual, everybody has a personal development plan. This is like you are on a PIP, you are on a personal improvement plan, and these are the formal steps that will be taken if you don't adhere to this. So when that's finally presented to an employee, when you're that far down the path, right, there's the very often not treaded path end result of that where the person miraculously turns around. I don't know many people that have seen that happen in their career. There are two other paths. One is that the person decides to exit the organization on their own. And the third is that you approach termination. And so that all really requires proper adherence to HR, legal understanding of the ramifications of that and what even rolling out that plan means at both your country level, perhaps even your state level, and for the organization as a whole. So again, I'll pause and just see if there are any questions about that. Okay, so we talked about understanding what conditioning you might have already about giving feedback and getting feedback. We have talked about frequently giving feedback, right? Actively practicing and building up that muscle of, I am a leader that gives feedback. I am a leader that gives feedback. Where's feedback? All of a sudden you're looking, you're seeing that feedback, you're finding it, and you're delivering it. And the more you're doing it, the more comfortable it is. And again, majority of that feedback that you give should be positive. And so then when it is time to give some constructive feedback, you want to approach that person when you think it's going to be a good time, offer them an opportunity to tap out. And if they don't tap out, be prepared to deliver the feedback. And give the feedback in as concise a manner as possible. You don't want to spend 5 minutes explaining why you're giving feedback. You just want to say, that presentation you gave was on a really interesting topic. However, I felt that you weren't as prepared as you could have been for that presentation. What did you feel about it? Notice I didn't give a litany of explanation why I wanted to talk about them not being prepared. Not being prepared is the feedback that I want to give. I'm just going to deliver it quickly. Maybe I had a specific example. Maybe somebody asked a question, and so I could add that in. That, so-and-so asked this question that's fundamental to this topic, and you weren't ready to answer it. And that led me to think that you weren't as prepared as you could have been. How do you feel about that? Ask how they're feeling about it. Maybe that person actually knew the answer to that question, but they are still working on their presentation skills. And so on the spot, they didn't know the answer because their mind went blank and they couldn't even remember that they knew the answer. But of course, afterwards, they knew the answer. Well, great. Now together, you've talked about the fact that this person actually is prepared, but they want to work on their presentation skills. By allowing the individual that you're giving feedback to respond to how do you feel about that in a really timely fashion, right? You're giving brief feedback, asking how they feel about that. Then you have the opportunity to get to what really the heart of the issue is. Because you may have thought it was because they came to a presentation ill-prepared, when really they were prepared, but they feel terrible presenting, right? That's a whole different topic. And they're actually now telling you, no, I was prepared. I knew my shit, but you know what? I drew a blank and I didn't even realize I drew a blank because I was so anxious about presenting. And oh, okay, now we're talking about presenting. That's a different thing. And you are telling me, you who I wanted to give feedback to, you're actually telling me what you want help with and what you want support with. And as we know, when we can tune into what an individual feels they want to grow in, what they feel an issue is, what they have identified as a weak spot or an area in which they grow, when they've identified it themselves and called it out, you're actually going to have so much more impact by working with them on what they're identifying. So even in that situation, if you're like, but if you had prepared better, you would have been fine. Like if you're thinking that in your head, that's not what the person's telling you, right? And that's the most important thing in this situation, is to be listening to what the person's telling you and go with it, because it's something that will ultimately help them to grow And maybe then they're going to get practice presenting. They're going to figure all this out. And maybe you know, two years down the line, have another discussion with them because they do another presentation and you're like, oh, you didn't seem as prepared. Maybe you approach it differently. Maybe at that point, it's like, you know what? I know we've been working on presentations for the past 2 years. And next time before your presentation, I want us to do a dry run because I think that together, you know, we can really hone in on some additional areas of growth for you. So again, I'm pausing just to see if there are any questions.
Yes, I've got another one. So you know the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus?
Yes.
Is there a difference to give men feedback? Because I've had to have 2 awkward situations with men and it did not go well, in the fact that, I mean, I'm a strong, powerful woman, but I was like scared after.
You were scared after you gave the feedback.
Yeah, I was the manager, but I thought these were big men, you know, and just any tips on giving men feedback?
So I have trouble, like there are definite differences, right? And I mean, I coach women and for a reason, right? Those that identify as women for a reason. I have trouble saying that there's these blanket ways in which you can give feedback or not. And so here is what I'd advise. Again, tuning into your empathy, right? Making sure that you are giving feedback in a place where you would want to receive feedback, right? So not feedback during the meeting, right? Not feedback in the hallway, but one-on-one feedback, making sure that you are being cognizant of anyone's pride and ego and just comfort, whether or not they're male or female. Thinking about that, then thinking about delivering it short and quick and making sure that you've been building up that feedback bank, right? That positive feedback. And if you haven't, maybe now's not the time to give that constructive feedback yet. Maybe you want to work on that first. And finally, inviting them, obviously, to tap out before you give that. And once you give the feedback, inviting them to comment on it. And then I'd ask you, you know, because I would almost guarantee that you said something like, how do you feel about that? Or what do you think? And maybe that's when you got the reaction that left you feeling uncertain and scared.
Well, he walked out. So I'd given the feedback. And what it was is this person had been told in the end of year review, we think you need to go on a communications course to get better at communicating with the teams. And he'd only been back a day from the communications external course, which was very expensive. And he fired into another employee again. And so it was a roundtable discussion. X person goes and does that. And he said, but Y person has to do that. And they got confused. So I got him straight into the office and said, look, I understand you've just come back of this great course, blah, blah, blah. You've kind of done it again. And I just wanted to let you know, this person's now flown away. They've gone away for the weekend. It's left me with the work and it's put me in a tricky situation. And he was fuming because, you know, I'd given that feedback. He leaned back in his chair, kind of mansplaining. I thought he was going to go on the floor. And I could tell he just ran out, had a cigarette, and he reported me. I think that's what happened. And then there was this awful story after, you know, that he hated me, whatever. So that was like one experience of giving men feedback. And it did put me off a little bit.
Of course. And I think that is, and I'm assuming that this is in a very cosmopolitan city where there's a lot of different nationalities.
Yes.
And so there always is, and you know, that you're bringing up a wonderful point because I didn't stress this. There is the knowledge and the understanding of the cultural differences. In our culture, right? More Western culture, even Western European culture, it is, well, I'll just say UK, because I don't even want to generalize for France and Spain. In the UK and the US, and possibly Australia, we give feedback, right? We're expected to do it. We know how to do it. We're expected to receive it. We want to receive it better. Not every culture feels that way. So cultural sensitivity is important. However, as we become more of a global community, it is important that we help invite other cultures to learn, to give and receive feedback, because it is an important and globally recognized way of improving business and improving business practice. So I think you were probably working with a lot of toxic masculinity in that situation. Yep, you were working with cultural differences. If we can get past a person's anger, anger is always a mask for another emotion. I just want to say that again, because when I first learned that, I had to write it down a million times. Anger is always a mask for another emotion. So what may that individual have felt and not had the emotional intelligence to tap into then? Perhaps shame, right? They went to this course that was expensive. First off, they had to go. Somebody told them they needed to go to a communication course. Maybe they spent the entire time there feeling like it was bullshit and thinking it was bullshit. And then they come back and they're being told that what they went and learned, they're not even implementing, and it's only day one. And oh my gosh, is that probably masking a lot of feeling of failure, of shame, of, yes, that anger is masking a lot of that deep down. But could that person tap into it? Probably not. Sometimes we're in positions as managers where we give feedback that seems to fall on deaf ears. And maybe it does for like 20 years. They get feedback like this from different managers. They job change and, manager change. And yeah, they hated that manager. But in time, if they evolve as an individual, they're going to look back and be like, Gaynor gave me some information and I didn't take it because I wasn't in the right place to take it. And they're the ones that are going to have to live with that, honestly. That doesn't make it any easier for you in that moment, but recognize that there are going to be people that are going to react with anger, and anger is always masking something else. And you can't do anything to help them get through that layer of anger. And if they left the office, right? If you just gave the feedback quickly and concisely, and they took it and went on their merry way, and then eventually went on their merry way in their journey of their career, you did what you were tasked to do. And you've probably learned from it, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it again in the future.
Right. Okay, well, I had to leave that job, unfortunately, after a couple of recurrences like that. So that's why I just asked, because it was cultural and it was male, and I wanted to mention it.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important. And the feedback that you give on this is so important, because it's also something that we should look for when we're interviewing, when we're thinking about where we're going next, making sure that it's a culture that is going to support feedback. And even, on a few sessions ago, when we were talking with, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on her name, but she had the great point of talking about and asking what somebody's managerial style is when you're interviewing. Then you also can talk and ask about what's the culture in this organization on giving feedback. How open is everybody to giving feedback? Is this something we're trained on? Is this something we talk about? Or is it like this taboo subject and it comes up just in your annual reviews? Finding out what the culture is and understanding that is important. And so, yeah, if you were in an environment where there was an undercurrent of toxic masculinity and you didn't have the support of leadership working to change that, then yes, it was best that you departed that environment. And sometimes we find ourselves there, but we always get an opportunity to grow.
Correct.
All right, that was pretty much all I wanted to talk about today in terms of giving feedback. So quick tips, understand what your conditioning is about giving feedback and getting it, and then start to practice it. Practice it day in and day out. It is a muscle. It is something that we can get stronger at through practice and attention. And be ready to tap out if you're being offered feedback and you're not ready to get it. Always be ready to offer somebody the opportunity to tap out and to respect that and the person's wishes. Give feedback quickly and concisely. Ask them what their feelings are, and always try to really get to the root of the problem. And, you know, with Gainer's example, understand that anger as a reaction from that person is always a mask for other feelings. And you might not be in the position right then where you can be helping them to understand and unearth what's underneath the anger. All right. Well, we're wrapping up. Shelly, I'm sorry, I see you're just joining and we're actually just wrapping up. So we'll make sure you get a copy of the video. Thanks for joining today. And if there are any questions, make sure when you hit hashtag replay, you let us know that you're here so that we can answer any questions. Shelly, as I mentioned, we'll get you a copy of the video. And if you could just drop your email address into the chat directly to me before I close down the Zoom session. That way I can make sure you get the video. And thanks everybody for your time today. I hope you found this valuable. I'm looking forward to your feedback on this session. And I look forward to connecting next week. Let me just take a quick minute to know what we're talking about next week before we get off the call today. So next week we are talking all about the success of disagreeing. So Gainer, I'm sure we can build on a few examples that you have of your time in different cultural situations. And there is so much power in being able to rethink your position. Even if you're not going to change your mind or you don't end up changing your mind, there is so much power in teams being able to disagree in a constructive fashion because we more fully have the opportunity to vet whatever proposal we're putting forward, whatever project we're working on. We, in essence, are going through a risk management internally when our teams disagree. And there's just so much power in having a stronger product, a stronger team, a stronger culture through productive disagreements that it's essential that we talk next week about the success of disagreeing. All right. Shelly, we got your email address, so thank you. And thanks everybody for your time today. I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday and we will tune in again next week. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.